Recording in progress.
Okay. I need to talk to you no more. I'll talk to you again tomorrow. Or Friday after grand jury.
Aloha, everybody. We're just going to give another couple minutes for everybody to join. We're so excited to have you all here. Thank you for coming. Again, this is for Grant Basics. So it is, pretty rudimentary, real basics on demystifying how to write and report on a grant for your organization or entity. I will not be offended at all if you all head out because it's too simple for you. And then you can always go ahead and sign up for one of the other kind of more intensive grant writing series. So no pressure at all. Just wanted to make sure that we made that clear. We're just going to give it another couple of minutes for people to join, and then we'll get started maybe around 1:03. Thank you. I see your message about getting a recorded version of the session. We can definitely send that out, and it will be posted up on our Maui United Way website, along with other resources that are made available. In the interest of being respectful of everybody's time, we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, this is Maui United Way's Demystifying Grant Basics. The purpose of this series, and in particular this grant basics tutorial, is to understand the grant basics and to empower our community to do more. One of the things that we realized especially after the wildfires, was the need to ensure that there's equity and the capacity for our organizations to have access to funds to do the great work that you all are doing. And one of the ways that Maui United Way wants to support that is to make sure that everybody knows how to write a grant and the basics for what that means, and then hopefully be able to bring more funds into the community in that way. So that's what we're here to do. It is very basic. It's like a Grants 101. There will be a couple other tutorials that I've recorded previously that focus on Indigenous grant writing and sharing mo'olelo through grant writing that will be available to you also on our website. It's linked. I did that with the Ohana Center for Excellence previously. So those will be available. I will not be offended again if this is too simple and you all need to drop off. So please feel free to do that if this is too simple, but also check out the additional federal grant writing workshops that are going to be available. And there will be 2 additional in-person grant writing workshops at the end of this first series that we're doing. Okay, so what we're going to be doing with our time together, we're going to do a quick introduction with my colleague Makana and I, share a little bit about Maui United Way's mission, discuss different terminology that's utilized within grant writing and reporting, to familiarize ourselves with it, review a proposal template and get a sense of what different aspects of grant writing areas you need to focus on. Have a quick review on your organizational strategy and ensuring that you can clearly articulate that and that you're thinking about those things. Discuss the proposal review process, looking at the data and reporting that's going to be necessary for you to not only present your grant, but also report on it afterwards. And then I will provide you a master list that I've been coming up with for a while now on different grant writing resources. It's all out there and is open source, but it's really nice to be able to look at all of it kind of in one place and have it be kind of the foundation for where you start. So we'll do that and then we'll wrap up. Lindsay Shiroma with FEMA is kind enough to be monitoring the chat for us. So if you have any questions, feel free to either raise your hand or put your question in the chat, and we'll make sure to try and answer it the best that we can as we move forward. All right, we'll start with introductions. Makana?
Hi, Makana Rossetti here, the Impact Coordinator for Maui United Way. I've been with Maui United Way for 9 years now. So I will let G kind of take the reins on this presentation, but I will kind of provide more insight into how Maui United Way does its review process, and she'll kind of give a more overview of what other types of grants are out there. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Makana. And aloha, everybody. My name is G. I'm the Director of Impact for Maui United Way. I've been in this position since February, but for the last approximately 20 years already, I've been doing grant writing, reporting, and development work for different nonprofits statewide, mostly on Oahu and Maui, and doing consulting around many of those things. So I'm really happy to be here to share this information and make it as open source as possible to continue to make it so that there are more people doing this work and bringing funds into our community in areas of need. So really happy here sharing this stuff. I would like to make a quick caveat just to let you all know that what I'm sharing is, my experiences and my thoughts. There's not just one way to do things. So feel free to take what you want and leave what you don't want. There's never right way, but hopefully some of these tips and tricks will be helpful as you all start your journey. Always feel free to reach out with any questions that you might have that we can support in. But here at Maui United Way, we're really hoping to be a resource for you all and bridge as many of those gaps as possible.
Sorry, just real fast. If you did not pre-register for this workshop, that's totally okay. But if you don't mind putting your name and email in the chat, that way we'll push out all the follow-up with the recording information, etc. to everybody. But if you didn't pre-register, I won't have your contact information. So if you could please make sure to put that in the chat.
Thank you, Lindsay. So I also want to let everyone know my internet is really unstable. So G, if you can let me know if I should go off of video, if that might be better. So our mission here, Maui United Way, is to bridge resources that enrich and empower our County of Maui community. And so this really is part of that, really empowering our grassroots local nonprofits to understand what kind of funding is out there and really empower you to go after those funding so that if something does happen, you guys have the tools and resources to make sure you're able to fund the amazing work that you're doing. And our vision really is to be that trusted leader to unite Lanai, Molokai, and Maui in providing opportunities for our community to flourish sustainably. And a few years ago, we did develop our diversity, equity, and inclusion statement. It was in our, and I have to talk to G more about this too, we're really empowering our nonprofits to create your own, to really make sure within your workplace, you level the field and make sure that we just have diversity within our workspace so that we are being able to also touch all members of our community equally. So just wanted to share that. And there is a hyperlink that will take you to our DE&I statement that will be on our website as well.
Thank you, Makana. So we're going to start off having a quick discussion on the common grant terms that are oftentimes utilized within grant RFPs and RFQs, which is also a term. So the first one we're going to talk about is RFPs or RFIs. So those are basically your grant, like a grantor is asking you for a request for a proposal. So that's what the RFP stands for. Oftentimes it's called an RFP or an RFI, request for information. So it's really, the directions and instructions provided for you to then take it and follow that guideline step by step. It's the guidebook that's provided by the grantor. For instance, Maui United Way will have one. We'll provide it for you. We'll go over that actually at a later time within this training. So it allows for you as the prospective grantee to understand what the organization, the grantor, the funder is looking for, and why they're pushing out this funding and what the intention of that funding is. And this is a really, really critical document for you to review and fully understand. It allows for you to get an insight into the mind of the grantor, because you're really trying to align the work that you're trying to do with that grantor as closely as possible, right? So if they're looking for to fund nonprofits who work with kids, if you're an organization that works with animals, it's probably not the right fit, for instance, right? But it can get really even more granular and more specific on the engagement, what they're looking for, how they're looking for you to engage the community. Oftentimes, grantors have come up with this RFP and RFI, and Makana can attest to this as well, after lots of time and energy getting a sense of what the community needs are. So it really should be your roadmap to be able to support that process. The next term is fee for service. That's utilized in the sense of if you are, for instance, if you were doing a training and there is a cost for that training to hire the facilitator, that would be that fee for service, that specific amount that it costs for you to actually execute the project or the program. The administrative or fringe costs are the additional costs that are necessary for you to actually execute the grant as a nonprofit or as an organization. So that would include things like your bookkeeper, the audit, administrative support, maybe costs of the executive director if they're not directly helping to support the project itself. So that's what's called fringe or administrative cost. And 99.9% of the time, I actually want to say 100% of the time, because I've yet to see anything otherwise, unless it's a specifically focused grant for administrative costs in particular. There's a cap on what that administrative cost is. So it might be 2%, 3%, 10%, something like that. Often in federal grants, there's a specific percentage that you're allowed of the full grant in itself. So if it's $100,000 grant, it would be, if it was 10%, it would be just that 10% only. You cannot go over that with your administrative costs, or that overhead cost, as people would call it. Aligned with that is direct and indirect costs. So your direct cost is, if you're trying to run a program for kids in West Maui, it's the cost of you hiring your team to be able to go out and do that program, the cost of the supplies necessary to provide to the community to do the program, all those things. Indirect costs is more along the lines with that fringe or administrative costs, or additional things necessary for you to operate your organization as a whole, but it doesn't directly go to actually providing the service that your program or your project is asking to do, if that makes sense. And then lastly on this page, and then I'll do a quick pause for questions on any of these terms, is public versus private funders. So public refers to governmental funders, right? So federal, state, county, city and counties. So money that's usually coming from, tax dollars in some capacity. And then private funders are more philanthropic funders. So people like Hawaii Community Foundation, Castle Foundation. So just like smaller entities that they don't always have to be smaller. Weinberg Foundation is huge, for instance, but foundations that are private entities that are not, coming out of governmental tax dollars. Just as a note here and a caveat, if you are new to grants, I would highly recommend you start with a private funder grant. It is a lot simpler usually to fill out that application and to report on that. So it allows for you to kind of get your bearings a little bit and create a system in place for that. There's usually a pretty significant difference between private and public funder RFPs and RFIs, and also the reporting metrics that are necessary to do that. And the very, very particularness of how you report on costs, for instance. So just keep that in mind as you go through. And if you're going for public funding, you really have to be prepared for the proper infrastructure in place to support the reporting side, because that's really the heaviest lift. Any questions on any of these grant terms? Feel free to come off mute or put in the chat. Other grant terms for you to keep in mind are subcontractors. So that would be if there's for instance, if Maui United Way took on a grant, like we have a grant right now that we are going to be executing around brownfields. And we are not experts in brownfields. So we are going to be actually taking that grant. It's going to be $500,000. We will be subcontracting it out to another organization that is an expert in providing that community engagement and doing the assessments for those brownfields. So we will provide actually an RFQ to get some quotes, make it so that there's bids in place, make it so that there's equity in who's able to apply. And then after that selection is made, that individual entity would become the subcontractor. So that's something to keep in mind if you are a business and you are not a nonprofit. Sometimes if your missions align, you can actually be a subcontractor and partner with a nonprofit who might be able to apply for specific grants, or partner with a governmental agency who's applying for grants.
Question RFQ.
Yes. RFQ is request for quotations. I will be honest with you, over many, many years, I've become familiar with these terms, but I Google all the time still, because people come up with all sorts of new things. So usually if you Google like RFQ grants, what does that mean, or whatever it is, like I still definitely use Google on a regular basis for things. But that's what an RFQ is. An RFQ is a request for quotations, which would mean that you just need like the quote in itself. You don't need a full proposal that's written out on why do we think that you're good for this, X, Y, and Z, because in particular, engaging community around brownfield is very, very specific and granular. So there's a lot less we need to know about the individual. We just need to know what is the bottom line of how much will it cost, and are they able to provide the work in the timeline that we're providing. Restricted funds then is funding that is specific for a project, program, or a specific reason. So that would be if the Brownfields grant is an example of that. The Brownfields grant for $500,000 that Maui United Way is in the process of encumbering will only be able to be utilized for what we said we're going to utilize it for. So if I wanted to use it to support gas cards for the community in West Maui because they needed it, unfortunately, that's a bucket that I cannot draw those funds from, because it's specifically restricted for the specific purpose of that grant. On the other side of that, which is definitely the way to go if you're able to find donors or funders that are willing to do that, is unrestricted funds, which means there's enough trust-based philanthropy from that funder where they're saying, here, Maui United Way, I'm going to give you $500,000. You all do what you think is best, aligned with your mission and your vision and your values, to support the community as needed. So I can utilize those funds however I want to. Most of the grant funding, though, I would say 80 to 90% of the grant funds that are out there and available are restricted to a specific program that you would lay out, or the areas that they're looking to fund in particular. Matching funds is another term that's utilized often within the grant writing world. Those are funds that you may already have. So let's say you have an annual operating budget of $100,000 for your organization, and you get a grant, and in the RFQ or I'm sorry, in the RFP, it states we need 10% matching funds. So if you are writing a grant for $50,000, you would need to show that you've got 10% of that covered with other funding sources, and that would be considered what they call quote unquote matching funds. So it's additional funds from another source or revenue stream that you either already have or can secure to support the program or project that you're writing the grant for. Grants are normally organized into capital versus operation grants. So capital grants are grants that are going to be to develop physical places and spaces, right? So you want to build a building. You want to buy property to be able to create a business center, right? Those are capital improvement asks. You want to redo a property because it's older and there needs to be new ACs installed and the flooring and the roof needs to get redone. All of that would be considered in the grant writing world we call capital asks or capital improvement funds. Those are often fewer and further in between. So most of the time, if there's a capital ask out there, it is maybe once a quarter, a funder will say, hey, we're interested in looking at what your capital needs are, or twice a year or something like that. More often than not, if there's a funder that's available and it's not on a specific cycle, the operations cost can be more rolling. So it might be we're going to review those like once a month. Capital asks tend to be bigger and for specific projects. Think the Weinberg buildings that you see within our community, different things like that, versus operational costs would be actually funding the program or the service that you're actually doing within your organization. And then the last grant term on this page is fiscal sponsorship. So again, we were talking briefly about how you might be a for-profit entity or business. Let's use, we just got done completing a mental health RFP and award process. And the fiscal sponsorship might be, I apologize. There's the phone going off here. Fiscal sponsorship might be that there is a therapy organization that is going to connect with a nonprofit organization to then provide the program or the service. So that allows for, I'm very sorry, give me 1 second here. I don't know how to turn this off. Then unplug that phone. So the fiscal sponsorship allows for a for-profit entity to partner with a nonprofit organization that then can write the grant for them and then subcontract out for organizations. And this is and has been common sometimes in the mental health sector, for instance, because there isn't enough therapists that are in the nonprofit sector. So it allows for a little bit of flexibility if there's work being done in the for-profit sector for them to partner with a nonprofit entity if you have to be a nonprofit to be able to write the grant. Any questions on these terms? Right. So we're going to delve deep now into proposal templates. This is just an example, but once you start to look at grants and the RFPs and RFIs that are available out there, the proposal templates do not vary very much from each other. So these kind of key areas are often utilized by funders to get a better sense of who you are, what you want to do, why you want to do it, and how you're going to do it, and how much it's going to cost. So we're going to go through these just so you have a better understanding of what each of the different sections is looking for through this process. And then as you go through and take a look at some of the grants that might be applicable to your organization, you'll start to see that this is a very common trend. What I often do is when I started a new organization, or if I'm supporting an organization, I will write 1 or 2 grants, kind of like a longer grant with additional support in it, and then a shorter grant, and utilize those almost as templates, because there's oftentimes parts of these grants that you can rinse and repeat and reutilize as you write multiple grants. Grant writing is what I consider, it's like fishing. You got to have multiple fishing lines out there, right, to catch the fish. So you don't hunt a pa'a with like 1 fishing line out there and you sit there and you wait, right? So especially if you've written a template already and you've written proposals, you can utilize sections of that proposal, adjust and adapt it to different grant opportunities to make it so that you're out there. And I think the other part to keep in mind is to not be discouraged when you don't receive grants, right? I believe this is from a long time ago, but I want to say it's like 20 to 30% is the normal grant approval rate for all that you write. So that's why the templates are really critical, because then you don't have to spend as much time. It takes time initially to do it, but then afterwards you're able to cut, copy, paste, and re-wordsmith through things. But getting your name out there in the community as a trusted partner organization is really critical. And then when you are denied, being able to ask those questions as to why, what could I have improved? What are the barriers that made it so that, we weren't selected? Those kinds of questions are always really, really good to ask. And it really, I think, shows organizations and funders that you're interested and you're in it for the long haul, and that you feel strongly and passionately enough about the project or proposal that you provided them with, that you're willing to advocate for and get a better understanding of those things. So with that in mind, usually project proposals and RFPs start with an organizational description. So this is, somewhere within this 1/4 to 3/4 page amount that kind of describes who you are as an organization, what your geographic reach is, what you're looking to do, how long you've been established for, and why you are the expert in the area that you're going to be writing the grant for. Think about this. Every time you write a proposal, you really want to think about it as if it's somebody who has no idea who you are. So I would really highly recommend you writing something like this and sharing it with somebody who really doesn't have a good sense of who you are, because that's where the questions are going to lie, right? So it allows for you to have the opportunity to introduce yourself, like think coffee talk. You're going into coffee. I've not met you. What are you going to say about who you are, what you are, why you were established, all those things. So that's what the organizational description is looking for. The second section is the problem or the opportunity. So this is the space, you're usually they ask for about a page or so. Do always keep in mind character limits. Be respectful of the time of the grantors in reading all of this stuff. So longer is not always better, but concise and answering the question is really, most important. This is to get the opportunity to share your expertise about the population you're trying to serve or the work you're trying to do, right? So what are you trying to do? Why is it imminently critical that this need be met? And how is and how is that going to, positive, how do you have the data to be able to show that this need is specifically there? What have you heard from the community? Are there quotes? Are there numbers? Is there information about that need being established? So this is where, almost think of it like a college paper, right? You're trying to show that that need is there. You're trying to give proof of it. It can be national proof. It can be ALICE data from United Way data. It can be data based on what you've seen. 60 people have asked for, I think actually 80 people asked for Grant Basics 101. It shows that there's a demand and a need within our community. for this to be shared out, right? That's how I'm going to show, if I'm looking for funding to be able to do more of these grant writing series, is that the problem and the opportunity is there, right? There are community members that are very interested in learning how to do this grant writing and need these basics. This many people have signed up, right? And then it's the program activities. This is the how, right? Like, what is your project? How are you going to address the above problem or opportunity with the work that you propose that you're going to do with the funds provided? So this is how you're going to talk about what is it, how are you going to do it, what's the timeline for what you're going to be doing, how are you going to engage the community? That's a huge one. So are you going to push it out on social media? Do you have an email list of the people that were interested in the program? So you're going to reach back out that way. Are you going to do press releases? So you want to get really granular enough for the grantor to understand that, okay, this person has done their due diligence, this organization has done their due diligence, and they know exactly not only what the problem is, they know what they want to do to hopefully have a solution for that problem, and they know their step-by-step goals on how they're going to actually make that happen. And that's where the program activities address all of that information. The fourth section is usually something around expected or anticipated results. So this is going to be where you have the qualitative and quantitative information to show and that you are measuring the efficacy of your program. So what are you going to have? What is the return on investment that this donor is going to have for investing in the programmatic activities that you are providing? Are you going to have pre and post test data to show that the keiki came in with a stress level of a 10 and they left after your program of 3 weeks with a stress level of a 4? So you're going to say, oh, we're going to go down 6 point indicators to be able to do that. We're going to train 20 kumu to be able to support mental health supportive services for our kids in the community. We're going to train 59 people to write grants better and have the basics understood to be able to support that process. So what are those expected results? Those should be quantitative in some capacity. So creating a measurement tool of some kind, the number of people you've served, the number of money you've been able to push out, whatever it looks like for your program or project. And it will also be qualitative. Having both is really, really helpful. It might be somebody saying, this was a really great training and, we really appreciated X, Y, and Z and look forward to having more opportunities to engage in trainings like this in the future. So that's where kind of those expected results are and the data that supports the work that you've done. Keeping in mind that how you track that and the data that you are able to provide, hopefully your organization already is collecting data. And so being able to utilize what you're already collecting is really great too, so that you're not creating additional burden on yourself and your organization through the process. Second to last is who's a part of your team, right? Are you set up to execute? They want to know that your project is shovel ready. And I use that in air quotes because it's not necessarily a capital ask, but that your operations ask is shovel ready. Yep, we're good to go. There's Makana. We're going to be able to do this training. We have the expertise already on board, or we've identified people, or we are ready and poised to be able to, hire the right people to be able to do this. There's interest in the community. All we need is the green light go and the funding to be able to move this forward. So being able to share that list of the board, the staff, the community advisors, the lead volunteers, and what they're doing, what they're going to be doing to support that process. This is also where I would recommend that you ensure that you touch on your financial checks and balances. Showing that somebody on your team has that knowledge to support the fiscal management of the grant in itself, right? And so oftentimes funders will start off with smaller grants just to see how you do, to make sure that all of those things are in place. And then lastly is the budget. This is where, I mean, I'm a social worker by trade, so this was the area that I had the most difficulty with figuring out. I spent a lot of years working on it, but really think of it like your home budget, right? Like how you are going to make sure that you pay your rent or your mortgage and you've got your groceries, and like think through all the different things that you need, similarly to what you do in life in this project proposal. So sometimes they'll ask for the entire organizational budget, but they will always ask also for the budget for the program in itself and how much it will cost. So that includes all of the fringe and overhead we talked about, the administrative costs, the cost of your supplies and your equipment, the cost of your team members, the cost of travel if it's included and allowed, all the different mileage, right? Rentals, everything and anything that is affiliated with you making it so that you're able to do your programmatic activities would need to be outlined in the budget and then explained, usually in like a budget narrative to explain how you're going to be doing it and basically walking through that budget in a written format. Any questions on the proposal templates and the different areas within there?
I would just like to chime in real fast. For your program activities and even sometimes your budget, this is a good point to loop in whoever will be operationalizing your project or your program. And I say this because I come from operations, and several times I've been handed a grant or a contract or something like that they did not engage operations, and I can tell just by looking at it, like something's not going to work, or we could have done it differently to make it more effective and just make the outcomes better. And so you don't want to necessarily restrict some of those operational things because you didn't have that communication. And if you communicate with your operational person, then that way you can maximize your outputs and your reporting for the grant and make it the most effective. And by doing that, you're going to build that rapport with your grantor that you are producing, the most desirable outcomes. So please, please, please do not leave out the people that are actually going to be executing the project or program for you.
Thank you, Lindsay. That is really, really critical, and vice versa. Don't have your operations person write a grant without talking to your finance people, right? And making sure that there's that synergy there. We're going to go into this a little bit more, but like that's part of figuring out what your project proposal is going to be, right? It needs to align with your mission. You need to have identified a project that makes sense and aligns. You need to have all the key stakeholders connected and having a discussion about what this project proposal is going to be looking like. I'll give you an example. When I was the director for the Nature Center, we had a NOAA grant that provided all sorts of funding to support great things. And one of the things was like shark tagging. And it right. So like all these cool things that are doing all these amazing things, but we didn't have binoculars and like mats for the kids to sit on for Hawaii Nature Center. So great things can be done, but when you don't have the basics to be able to do it, the next NOAA grant, after I came on, I wrote in mats for the kids to sit on and fresh binoculars, because the binoculars I had were literally older than I was. And it allowed for not only us to execute the program that we were getting funded for NOAA, but that also was able to be leveraged for other programs that we already had in place. And so there was an ROI that was significantly stronger. I never would have known that if I didn't ask my environmental educators, what do you need, right? If I didn't ask that, I wouldn't know. So being able to ensure that the ops team and the education team, or the people that are going to be executing that grant, has a say in it from the very beginning, not towards the end, right, is really, really critical. Have them help develop it with you. Any other questions on the proposal templates? Okay. So I'm going to go a little bit more granular, because this is usually where it gets more confusing for, I think, a lot of people that are looking to write grants and are within the nonprofit sector and grassroots organizations and whatnot. thank you all, first of all, for joining, because you're working really hard to use your powers for good. And this is not sexy work by any stretch of the imagination, but it's really important work. But most of us, myself included, are not as much numbers people. We're really the doers, right? We want to operationalize and do something great for our community. But what I found over the years is what allows us to be the doers is to have the funding and the proper, line items to support that and the budget set in place. So with that in mind, I'm just going to go through, this would be a sample budget template. This is pretty common. So it'll look something like this, and you can see, usually it's organized by a project expense. And it'll be, numbered out in some capacity. It'll have a line or a column for the request that you're asking for the foundation or whatever the public governmental sector, whatever it is. It'll ask what other sources of revenue. So that's what we're talking about with the matching, right? The matching funds. What other sources of revenue are you going to be able to provide for this project? And then it'll ask you sometimes what your in-kind contributions are. So these are volunteer hours, or what are you able to provide that you already have? For instance, for this, it's, hey, we have our facility already, so we're not going to charge for the $350 to actually rent out the facility to do the program. We'll provide that in kind. So you can see that, this looks like it is like a trainer activity, right? So, okay, we're going to hire the trainers. You see how granular it gets. We're going to have 2 trainers, 1 8-hour workshop with 2 trainers. So we're asking the foundation for $2,000 to cover that. Separated out from that is those 2 trainers getting back and forth from Oahu to Maui, right? That's going to be this amount of money. Ground transportation, this would be for a vehicle or Lyft or Uber, right? You don't have to specify because, a trainer might want something different, but it clearly states what funding is set aside for that. You're going to have 2 people there. You need to have a food and beverage line item. So, okay, it's going to be for 24 people. This is what we're planning. This is the amount that we need, the 600. The training materials. Okay, we need to print things. We need to have binders prepped and ready. It's going to be $25 a manual. We're going to get 24 manuals. So that's another $600. Shipping. Okay, we know that we're going to need to mail these things because, a portion of these people are going to be via Zoom, for instance, right? So we need $40 to be able to ship those things. The facilities are in kind. The overhead, this is overhead, administrative costs, like we've talked about previously. So we want to bill, $1,470 to the grant request or the foundation request, but we're also going to be charging for those 24 people. And so we anticipate $960 coming in for that registration fee to support actually executing this training program. So this is a very kind of common template. You can start to think about all the different logistics of different things. An important one to consider is oftentimes there's a difference between supplies and equipment. Equipment normally needs to depreciate. So a depreciation schedule means that it's like when you get a vehicle or a house, there's usually a schedule of how much you can deduct from your taxes or whatever it is, because there's equipment is, an item that needs to be put on a depreciation schedule, like a laptop. Eventually, the laptop that I'm working on right now will not be worth anything to Maui United Way, but that does happen overnight. So you're going to have to keep track of that as equipment. Supplies would be things like pens and Post-its and paper and, all those kinds of things that don't require a depreciation schedule. And it's like a one-time purchase of like regular kind of more general office supplies. So you have to keep that in mind as the difference between supplies and equipment as you push that stuff out. And then usually it asks for a tally up so that you can get a full sense of how much the entire project program will cost. And then it will oftentimes ask, hey, what other revenue sources do you have in place and how do you organize that? Have you secured it? Is it pending or is it in kind? So that's what this kind of bottom section is for, to help the funder understand where are you getting your money from, how are you getting it, and what is it for? Any questions on the budget template? Yes, that's a really good point. Thank you. I haven't mentioned this yet because we're trying to stay basic, but it is important to note that oftentimes grants will not cover everything. So food and beverage line items are sometimes not covered. Travel is sometimes not covered. So again, that's why reviewing and reading the RFP is really, really critical. Make sure that you're asking for things that you can ask for. If it said that you're not allowed any overhead or admin, you certainly shouldn't be charging $14.70 to that grant. They're going to think, oh, you didn't read the grant, right? The grant request. So keep that in mind and make sure that you're asking for things that are allowable expenses, as they're called oftentimes. Does the budget allow for per diem, or is that different for private? So it really depends. Most of the time, the budget will allow for something like that. You can usually put it in via line item, and normally organizations have a per diem rate that they have within their regular handbook that you have to follow. And then you can always ask your funder, you know, what if there's a scope of that. Federal grants are much more specific. You've got to follow federal cost guidelines. I believe there's a specific dollar amount, I'm not remembering off the top of my head, specific for lodging and specific for food that you can utilize. The Brownfields grant I was referencing, and most federal grants. I'm traveling for a conference coming up in September, and it goes from the 16th through the 19th. So the problem is that from like, let's say it's $50 a day for my per diem for food. I cannot spend $50 on the first and last day. The federal government only allows for you to be reimbursed for 75% of whatever your per diem is on your travel days, right? So things like that. Most of the time though, as you go through that process, asking these questions is completely okay. And I would highly encourage that of the funders so that they understand that you're really thinking this stuff through. And then afterwards, normally funders will provide you with additional specifics so that you're able to fully understand those things in advance. If not, you can always ask. Question. In revenue sources, would you list individual donor amounts or keep them together? So normally you would list it as keep them all together in a grouping to be able to say individual donations, or you can even say like organizational revenue, and then put that full amount together, and you would put secured, obviously, if the funds came in or whatnot. So normally, you know, revenue sources would be specified out if it's a specific foundation or a grantor that's asking. Any other questions on budget templates? Okay. Oh. Okay. Also, oftentimes they will ask you for a budget narrative. And did you see how I like talked through this chart just now? That's literally what they're looking for. And it feels redundant, but it allows for people to get a better understanding. And it's a little bit repetitive of like these extra parentheses, but they really want you to go through each line item and explain what it's for. There was a recent grant that Makana and I were looking through, and the budget asked for rental. And I was like, okay, but what's the rental for? Like there was no explanation as to what they were renting, why, how that connected to the grant in itself, and what they were trying to do within the project. So being able to explain the purpose, like, so what, like, why do you need food and beverage? Well, it's going to be a full day, you know, training. So to be able to, you know, ensure that people are able to stay there the entire time and not have to travel with food, blah, 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 blah. We're going to provide, you know, continental breakfast, lunch, and afternoon snacks for these 24 people. For them to be able to have the training materials when they go home, right? So it's really just explaining things more specifically around justifying why each project expense is there and why it's important for you to execute the project. All right. So this is like a really, really critical slide. And when we were going through and looking at many of the people that applied for this or that requested this Grant Basics training, a large significant portion of you shared that you didn't have a strategic plan. And it might not even be written, but we call it mission drift oftentimes within the grant writing sector and overall within organizations, where if you just look at the grant and say, ooh, I can get that money, I can go do that, it really starts to get really messy for your organization because you become like an octopus with all your tentacles going out and doing 64 trillion different things. So I would highly suggest that you take time prior to writing any grants to figure out what's your why. Ensure that you have a strategic plan that's written down. It does not have to be complicated, but it's really critical to understand what are you doing? What's your mission? What's your vision? What's your values? What are you trying to do with your organization to support the community in the next 3 to 5 years? That needs to be the core of everything you write for. And that's why it's so easy to take that core grant and recycle it again. Because if you provide and get a sense of like the net, you don't need 10 things. I'm talking like 2 to 3 things maximum in the next 3 to 5 years that you are trying to accomplish, right? Then you write for grants around those 2 to 3 things, and the funding will come in and support each other. So then you don't have just one funding stream for the project, but you'll have multiple funding streams to support different aspects of the project if you have a clear sense of what you're trying to do. If you don't, you'll start to mission drift out and try and cater to what the grantor is looking for. And then you'll have 10 different projects going that are not necessarily aligned with your mission and difficult to report back on because you're not streamlining your process for what you're asking for with an organizational strategy. Have a clear idea also of who's on your team, who's your leadership, who are your go-to players, do you have the support necessary to create and support a new project or to continue your existing project? That's really, really critical because especially these days, it's so hard to hire people right now, right? Everybody is short-staffed. So make sure that you know who your key players are and make sure you know what they can do, what they want to do, have those questions answered because Makana might be able to do something, but if she doesn't want to or if it doesn't interest her, then she's not going to do a good job executing it, right? So we want to make sure that we know what it is, get buy-in from your team, understand the process, understand how you're going to execute it. Once you figure out what those 2 or 3 things are that you're trying to do. How will you execute and track your progress rather? You have to have a clear sense of the timeline. How long will things take? You need the roadmap, right? What metrics or goals are you going to have accomplished along the way? How are you going to track those things? These are all questions you need to ask prior to writing the grant because you need to know how you're going to report on it prior to writing it, or else you're going to be really overwhelmed or you're never going to get another grant from the organization again because you're not going to provide the proper reporting metrics. I use this visual a lot. SMART goals, right? Making sure that everything that you're providing, the information that you're providing is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound. If you create a grant proposal that follows those 5 things, you will guaranteed be successful. You want to be able to be very, very clear and granular. And it's often difficult for those who are inside the organization, especially founders of organizations, because you know your organization so well inside and out, but being able to explain that properly is going to be really critical. And so making sure that you follow those SMART goals will be really, really helpful to make that happen. You're asking why, right? You're asking how, you're asking how much of this, how long will it take, right? Those are all questions that the grantors want to know. Any questions on this slide? Other little tips and tricks for success when it comes to grant writing. Coaching and mentoring is really, really key. I never in a million years thought I was going to be writing a bunch of grants for people reporting on them. I'm a direct service girl normally. I love doing, going out working with the houseless community. I've done all sorts of different things out in the community. But what I realized was it was really, really critical to be able to have the funding to support the work that our community needs. And I have always enjoyed writing, so it worked out really well. But I asked, right? You Google organizations that are close to yours, or reach out to the development directors of organizations that you're close to. Talk to other people that are grant writers already. Check in with HCBC, the Hawaii Consultants database, to see who's available. Talk to Hawaii Alliance for Nonprofit Organizations. Look for individuals who might know more than you to be able to coach and mentor you through that process. Ask if they're willing to share a redacted grant for you to look at and get a better sense of what it looks like. Have peer-to-peer reviews of your proposal in advance. Be able to take a look and see, have a fresh pair of eyes on things. Things like grammar, all that stuff really, really matters, right? Being able to show that you have that great attention to detail reflects well for your grant. So having that support in place and asking for help, I think, is really, really important through that process. Resources. Knowing what resources are already out there. Your grantor wants to know that you've done your research first. It shows that you've done your due diligence. It shows that you know the landscape of your community. And it shows that you're willing to collaborate and that you've identified gaps. So if you're working with, Kupuna, what are the other Kupuna agencies that are on island with you? How are they working? How does this fit in? Have you spoken with them? Even in grant proposals, I've been like, I spoke with these 4 different organizations and they're in full support. Some of them even provide letters of support for you because they're like, yeah, I'm super stoked about this opportunity to be able to expand services, right? So being able to know what the existing resources are and share what gaps there are. Also, please share those gaps with us at Maui United Way. We're really interested in continuing to learn and grow and support in the spaces that we need. So that's something to definitely keep in mind. We want to hear from organizations that can support that and our boots on the ground, right? So that we can help with the framework side of things. I call it a development tracker. I don't actually know what it is, but I've used it at every organization I've ever been to, and it's like super critical for this process. Have a system in place for you to gather these things and organize them. I really highly recommend a cloud-based drive of some kind, Google Drive or whatnot, that you can share with your team members or others. Have a folder full of just the attachments. There's like probably 10 documents that are rinsed and repeated for every grant that you're going to write. They want your 501c3 status. They want your DCCA. They want your annual budget. They want your certificate of insurance. Have all that stuff in one place so that it's super easy for you to drag and drop into the places that you need. Create a file folder for Maui United Way, the Ohana Mental Health Grant. Put everything into there. Then you can, have it in Word documents so that you can, again, cut and paste and utilize it for different reasons. And then having a spreadsheet or of some kind, whether it be a Google Sheet or an Excel spreadsheet with what is your plan? Most of the time when I've been a development director, what I would do is create kind of my plan for the year. I do my research, I figure out what are the grants that are available, so that I have some sense of when grants are due throughout the season, and I can be prepared for submitting those grants at the proper times. I know, for instance, the state grant and aids they usually come on at the end of the year, and they're usually due by around the 20th of January every year. So I know that that's something to be prepared for, because I don't want to spend my holiday writing a grant and aid the entire time. So having all of that tracked out, you can help divide and conquer. You can prepare things in advance. And then obviously there's going to be things that pop up along the way, but being strategic about what you're choosing to write for, where it makes sense, taking the time to do that research is going to be really important so that you're not just rushing things last minute. It also gives you a sense of your grant rate, right? So like how many out of, of these 5 of them got approved and 4 of them, got denied, right? Like getting a sense of what that is, tracking that, being able to show that, sharing that with your board, sharing that with other funders, and having you take a look at it, right? Like what's worked, because you might find, hey, you know what? My track record for private grants is like 3 times better than trying to go for governmental. I should focus my energy there, right? It allows you to be really strategic in your moves. Sharing knowledge. I would really like to highlight this. I think it's really, really critical for our community. We're way too small to be siloed and to not share information. We have always had enough when we work together. And so being able to partner with organizations that are mission aligned with what you do, grantors love it. They're looking for that collaboration. They're looking for our community to break down the silos that exist, and doing our due diligence to have those discussions, not only internally, like Lindsay was talking about, but externally with other organizations that align and are supportive of the work that you're doing. Ask questions. Develop rapport with your granting organizations. I wrote a bunch of grants just pro bono for a bunch of grassroots organizations and whatnot right after the fires. That was my kind of give back in the moment. I went and found Wi-Fi because I live on the west side and hold up to help to support what the community was already doing. And I luckily had a great relationship with Hawaii Community Foundation, and still they connect with me and they'll say, hey, this person didn't submit this report. Can you check in on that for me? Yes, absolutely. They're not going to ding them. They're going to make sure that it happens because I have a relationship with them, right? Make sure that you know the people that you're working with. And that goes for before the grant cycle, checking in to ask those questions, get your name out there, get your organization out there, show that you're being proactive during the granting process, making sure that you're engaging in that. And then after the grant cycles, Makana and I recently had an organization who didn't receive a grant, who, we had offered after the Ohana Mental Health Grant, hey, if any of you who didn't receive the grant want feedback on things, please reach out. And this organization reached out. We had a great conversation about how they can improve their grant writing in the future. We were super open to it. They sent a really nice handwritten thank you note afterwards. All of those touch points really matter through the process. It shows the continuity and the level of commitment that the organization has to do the work. Any questions on the strategies? Oh, sorry, I'm looking at chats here. Okay, sorry, double checking. All right, I'm gonna pass it along to Makana for discussion around the proposal review.
And so I'm going to kind of go over this slide from Maui United Way's perspective. So feel free, G, to chime in from a more holistic approach from what other grants are out there. So know your audience. As far as for Maui United Way, obviously we're a local nonprofit, but if you are, applying for those federal grants, just be mindful of the words that you're using, the Hawaiian words that you're using, just because they may not understand what they mean. So obviously putting them in parentheses, the English meaning would be very, very helpful. And then understanding that kahakos and okinas may not work within the grant. So it may come off incorrectly to the grantor when they're reviewing your application. So just be mindful of that. As far as Maui United Way goes, we have a really close-knit community with Maui, our relationship with Maui nonprofits. And so it's common for me as I'm reviewing the applications, or as our committee is. So our review process brings in our impact committee, which is usually made out of our board members. And then we reach out to other volunteers within the community who have, who specialize in that area. So obviously Ohana Mental Health Grant, we bring in some people who are experienced within that space, whether it's clinical or just within that space of dealing with other nonprofits that obviously are not applying for that specific grant, but have expertise in that field so that they can provide that, because I personally don't know too much about that space. So at least we can bring in those experts to help with that. But knowing the nonprofits, and if I have any questions or if our reviewers have questions, I usually will reach out to our nonprofits and just get some clarity on their application, but I can guarantee you that not all grantors will do that. That's just something that Maui United Way does, because we understand
for you guys as well. So
that not everybody.
my camera while we get going, just because sometimes my Wi-Fi is a little bit shaky, and I want you, of course, to focus on the content.
Oops. Okay, sorry. I wasn't sure she was presenting. Yeah, so as long as I know them, or at least the agencies, and I understand that that's not what they do. Grant writing is not part of their mission, or as far as what they're good at usually. So I try and give them the opportunity to better explain via question, reaching out separately so that our reviewers understand a little bit better. But I can understand that, you know, the national grants will probably not do that and may ding your organization if it's not clear enough. But as far as Maui United Way, we do provide the rubrics ahead of time, along with the RFP. And really our reviewers are going exactly off of that and scoring based on the rubric. So it's kind of given in advance. So I would just recommend you writing your grant and being able to answer and have other people review your grant prior to it reaching the level of the review process. Then follow all instructions. I know for me, it just adds more work, I think, on the admin side for the grantor to have to go and follow back up with you, just regarding if the budgets are asking for specific programmatic budgets, and then you're providing an agency level budget and we have to go back and forth. That obviously will just add, for us, it doesn't necessarily ding you because we understand that things happen, but I know other grantors that may play a big part in how whether you're funded or not. And so this is our RFI scoring rubric, and then we also attach the RFP scoring rubric below that, but it really walks through how you're graded and what an exemplary, you know, agency would get with their application. And so that's kind of what I wanted to share from the Maui United Way perspective.
Thank you, Makana. And yes, this is all online on our website, like I was sharing out. And oftentimes these rubrics are provided. I will share also, when you're writing your proposal, sometimes there are sections that are redundant. That's okay. Answer the question in the section, because you can see how these sections are organized a specific way. So sometimes you will be repeating yourself in how things are going to be organized, just kind of like the budget justification versus the budget in itself. So make sure that you keep that in mind and answer each criteria section properly with each section, because they're reviewing it based on those chunks oftentimes as it goes, if that makes sense. I go back to the slide deck here. So data and reporting. This is honestly what takes most of your time. And I think it's really, really critical, like I shared before, to have this prepared and ready in advance prior to writing your grant or submitting your grant proposal. You've got to be prepped and ready. Use as much of the data you're already collecting as possible. Don't reinvent the wheel. If you collect the number of people that attended your program and you do a pre and post test data on their knowledge improvement, then say that's what you're going to do your reporting on, because you already collect that. Don't be like, I'm going to ask them 64 different questions, you know, in another survey on top of what I'm already doing, right? Keep it simple, keep it clear, try and align it with what you're already doing. Try and make it as easy as possible for yourself and the community that you're serving. More and more grantors, I think, are understanding how important it is for us to make it easy for our grantees, but also the community members. We don't want to ask 64 different questions. If you're asking a question, there better be a good reason why you're collecting that information. How is that going to be a community benefit in some capacity? So make sure that you're not overdoing it. If you have the correct data, you don't need a lot of it. You just need the correct data incorporated into the reporting that you're going to be providing. Be timely. I think it's really, really impressive when an organization provides their report on time, or if they're not going to be, and I know Makana can attest to this, they let us know in advance. Hey, you know what? X, Y, and Z came up. We switched executive directors. Our finance team changed. Our audit went long, whatever it is. Would you mind if you gave us an extra month or whatever? 99.9% of the time, I don't think I've ever had anybody say no to me in 20 years of writing, when you're able to explain it in advance. So the communication is super critical, right? But be timely when you're able to show that you're invested in the process, not just to get the money, but to properly execute what you're doing with the funds. Because you have to remember, Makana and I, for instance, at Maui United Way, you all, if you are grantees, you're not reporting to us. We have to report to our board and our leadership, and then back to the donors that provided that funding to us. So there's many layers, and that communication is super critical to ensure that that line of communication is open. Providing the quantitative and qualitative metrics to tell your story, having a media release, attaching some pictures that engage and show that process if PHI isn't impacted, and if families or whomever you're serving is willing to. Having some great quotes to include in that process. Those are all really wonderful ways to report back and show what it was. I won't ever forget when I started at the Nature Center. One of the things that we gave to one of our funders was just thank you cards from our kids, but we had no pre and post test data, right? So it's yeah, they loved the field trip, but what do they gain from the field trip, right? Can we show that they learned to be more connected to INA-based education and supporting environmental, stewardship throughout the process? We want to be able to show things other than just, oh, they had a good time, right? It needs to be more than that, and pick and select and be really choosy about what you're providing in that category. Keeping track of your funds spent. Again, going back to the bookkeeping and financial side of things. Take a look and make sure that you're spending the funds in the proper categories. You're spending down at the right rate. Are you, is it going too slow? Is it going too fast? Communicate that with your funder if your budget is changing in advance. Don't wait till the end and be like, oh, shucks, we overspent in this category and underspent in this category. I hear it more and more. They're looking for a partnership, right? Funders are looking for a partnership. They think of you as a partner. So it's not a top down anymore. It's really looking to create a relationship because you all know the community the best. And so that process, is that communication is important to help to support that process in your data and your reporting. Okay, this is the big slide. So I shared with you all this, and this is all coming out to you too. But there's a lot of really great existing grant writing resources that we either are too busy to find, which I can totally understand, or don't know where to look. So this is a really, really great slide. All of these resources are available in the link that I just sent you as well. So it's connected to our grant resources section on Maui United Way's website. There's a sample of a programmatic budget from the grant and aid that we click on here. It's very similar to the budget I just showed you all that we walked through. There's also Hawaii Alliance for Nonprofit Organizations. We're looking to partner with them in the future even more so, but HANO as their acronym, they have a great website to support grant writing. They have a GTAS, so it's Grants Technical Assistance Services. So they have funding set aside to support you in writing your grant and helping give you tips and tricks. I've participated in it before when I had time to be able to support that process of providing that support. So that's down here. There's a grants technical assistance support. So if you have questions, want somebody to review it, want someone to strategize on how do I write this grant, or can you review this? This is a great opportunity that's available. Kamehameha Schools actually, I think, funded a portion of it. Lots of different things for private and public grants to bring more funds into our community. There's a section on navigating grant resources on the HANO website. And there's the Kukulu switchboard as well, which is an opportunity to share like what do we need, what do we want, and share resource sharing through that process. So Hano's an excellent website and organization that I would highly recommend you engaging with. Hawaii Community Foundation also has a calendar of their grants. So that's a link to that. It shows exactly what their grants are available, when they're due. They specifically focus on nonprofits and fiscal sponsorships. So you have to be fiscally sponsored if you're not a nonprofit organization. PICO and Grant Central Station are two fiscal sponsorship specific organizations that help support grassroots organizations and other organizations that might not have a 501c3. Keep in mind too that that's a strategy too. Like, think about whether you want to be a 501c3 if you're not. It's time consuming. There's paperwork, there's board members. It's a lot to manage, right? So don't just create one. Maybe you partner and your idea is a project underneath an existing 501c3. One of my good friends likes this quote. As I was starting in a leadership program on Maui, I said, we don't need more nonprofits. We need the nonprofits that we have to do more. And we can, right? If we partner and work together, because it's laborious to maintain and run a nonprofit. So let's work with the nonprofits that we have and elevate them to serve the community that we need. Grants.gov is another one. This is federal grants in particular. So looking at what the federal grants are available. Papa'olalokahi has different resources as well, Native Hawaiian focused organization. And under Papa'olalokahi is the Ohana Center for Excellence. Those are where the two grant writing workshops that I've done previously that you all will have access to through the Maui United Way website. But also they have tons of different workshops and videos, tutorials of those workshops for you to be able to access and look at and review and sign up for and engage in. This sounds really funny, but I follow a lot of different organizations via social media. Instagram will guide you when there are funders. So I follow Hawaii Community Foundation. I follow Castle Foundation. I follow organizations. I go and look at different organizations that are aligned with mine and say, hey, what grants did they get? Who are they applying with, right? What makes the most sense? You talk to them about how did you organize those things? I think that's the beautiful thing about, being out here in Hawaii. Like, we collaborate really well together, and that aloha extends into, this sector of grant writing where people are really looking to support each other and uplift each other together. State, county opportunities, and obviously, federal, which, we'll go into more in the rest of the series. But the state grant and aids are operations and capital funds that you can ask for. That part you do need to do some, have some meetings and connect with people within the legislature. A lot of it is around, obviously, politics and lobbying, making sure that you understand that part. Keep track of your lobbying hours. That's really critical and important. The county also websites, you can get onto listservs for both of these things so that they can email you when things arrive. I also I made friends with somebody in the state government, and I'm like, hey, Scott, every year, will you please text me when the GIAs are out so that I'm not searching for it all the time, because it changes a little bit year after year. Things like that. You can go in and look at prior years' grant and aids and look at who was funded for how much and what types of things, were funded. Your Office of Economic Development by county. OHA, Kamehameha Schools, has regional offices that you can have discussions around if there's a specifically an education-based or Kanaka-based project or program that you're interested in getting funding for. Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement is another place that sometimes has. We talked about the grant and aids. I also have a hyperlink to the Office of Economic Development's handbook. So it's their grants handbook that really shows the process. It's kind of like another RFP to be able to review and look at. That's more governmental. This link is for identifying, because oftentimes grant 4s will ask for what is your goal, your objective, and your outcome. Having a clear understanding of what those things are and how to delineate those things within your proposal. So this is just a hyperlink to an explanation of what each of those terms means more in depth and in detail. We talked about the grants technical assistance. Actually, I was just on a call early this morning about with the Funders Collaborative, and we as funders are looking to streamline processes for organizations to make it so that maybe it's not, instead of writing 10 applications to 10 different funders, we write one application and 10 funders look at it and figure out what we need to do. We know and we see, and this is part of why I started working for Maui United Way, we need some systems changes to make it easier to access, right? Let's create frameworks that work. Let's look at, what opportunities there are for, if we have, another disaster, can we have a hui of grant writers prepped and ready and available to support our community so that, those who are actually out and doing the direct service don't have to stop doing the direct service, helping our community, and they can lean into the grant writers that are available. Wouldn't it be great if we could support Kauai when something happens on Kauai and Kauai could support us so that I don't have to write grants. I can actually go out and get medication to, the kupuna that are my neighbors instead, right? So we're looking at different programs and processes like that to streamline that. A Hano link to starting a nonprofit, if you do choose to do that. It's a process, and making sure that you do it properly is really, really critical. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention on the resources page is AI, artificial intelligence. I have mixed feelings about all of this, but I've started dabbling in it slightly, and especially when you're busy and like I talked about, your organization too well, or maybe English wasn't your favorite subject, and you're not the best writer. That's okay. You can literally go in, you can type into an AI platform or talk into an AI platform and say, hey, I want these bullet points written into a summary that's 4 paragraphs long, and it'll help you with an initial draft, and then you can walk through and hone it in further. I would not recommend you just copy and paste, but it will give you a template for it. Or if you've written something, you can check it for grammar or help to make it a stronger proposal through that process. And for those of us who aren't as focused on grammar and English and writing, especially for those federal grants, it will provide you a lot of additional support for free. So this link is to a Google tutorial on artificial intelligence that I found recently.
We have a question about CDBG funding.
Oh yeah, those are my favorite. You know that, Lindsay. Okay. Yes, CDBG funding, Community District Block Grants. So that's HUD funding that's being pushed down from the federal government into our counties, usually our city and counties. We're going to get some disaster relief funding from CDBG, actually a lot. That's going to be coming down the pike specific for Maui County after the wildfires. So it's going to be called CDBGDR because the government loves acronyms. And so that would be falling under public or governmental funding. And that will also be available in your county website, right? Usually there's no, unfortunately, there's no time frame right now yet. It hasn't been released from the federal government. But try and get put on. We're working on is a regular internal, operational newsletter that Maui United Way will put together for our community. So make sure that you respond back if you are, put a chat in or ask to be put onto the newsletter database on our website, because we will try and keep track of that. Unless on social media, a lot of those things we do try and post and keep up to date on, but currently no time frame as of yet on CDBG. That one is all capital mostly. The disaster relief also is capital only, and the reporting on that is horrendous. I think when I was at Halemaku, 90% of my time was dealing with writing and reporting on CDBG. It requires Davis-Bacon wages and specific paperwork and tons of work plans and other project proposals. Once you get it, it's great. We were actually in the funders funders collaborative talking about specifically finding some grant writers and reporters that are ma'a to the process around CDBG, and being able to work with the Patients Kahula, who is over there to help to support the different nonprofits through that, because it is unfortunately very time consuming, and they don't cover a lot of the costs of that process. So it ends up going oftentimes to larger organizations because of that, that can deal with the overhead costs of actually implementing that process. Okay. Any other questions on the resources? All right. I wanted to flag overall that there are additional federal grants and different foundation grants workshops that are available at the same site that you the tiny URL /grants 808. So feel free to enroll in those. Those will be being done by other trainers. And then the last two will be in person. And Maui United Way and Makana and I will be there to support the process of kind of going through a little workbook and, kind of starting the process of doing that grant writing or taking a look at some of your grants and having discussions a little bit more in depth and getting a little bit more granular on these topics. Also within this mauiunitedway.org/grant resources, this slide deck, along with all of the hyperlinks, are available. And there's two additional trainings that kind of go into, in specific, like I was sharing, Indigenous grant writing, mo'olelo, and how we can empower our community to utilize the stories that we have and the knowledge that we have, and translate that into the grant proposals that we are able to come up with. So feel free to take a look at those, because those will continue to reinforce what I've shared today, but also share some additional information about coming up with your why and really sharing and fully understanding and being able to tell that story for the grantors that you're looking to engage.
I would like to point out for the in-person ones, I know we're still pending some times. It's just because we're waiting on confirmation of where the space is going to be. So we will follow up with everybody once we have those times. I know some people have also signed up for both of them, most likely because we don't have the times yet, but it's not two different ones. You really just need to sign up for one. We were only offering it at 2 different days times to account for people's schedules and give everyone the most opportunity to join. So once we have those times down, we'll send it out to everybody, and we will ask that you do one, not both, just to make way for people. As well as for that one, it's really important to have a project identified. If you come in without knowing what project or program you're trying to get funding for, it's going to make that particular one more difficult to actually execute and do with everybody. So you do have some time, but if you have signed up for that, please come with a project identified.
Which means you have a strategy plan for your organization and what you're doing, right? And it's part of those, 2 to 3 identified projects that you wanted to do.
Okay. But yes, otherwise open for any general questions. No questions? Everybody's ready to write grants? Also, everybody is on mute if you have to unmute yourself.
And don't yet, if you can, because we have a survey, because we want to continue to hone the different things that we can provide. And I know Lindsay's going to drop that into the chat. Carrie, go ahead. Sorry, Lindsay.
Oh, no, I was going to say, we're going to send that out to the survey and the survey along with the information for the recordings, etc. But I do want to emphasize how important it is for everybody to take the survey. This basics was just to provide some foundation. Ideally, we want to continue doing these and we want to do them tailored to the things that you all need and want to learn. And we can't do that without some of the feedback. So the pre-registration questions were really good. That's definitely going to help us. But answering this one as well, it's going to help us understand what works for you guys and what else you want to learn. So I would appreciate it if everyone can make sure to take that. And we'll email it, but I'm going to drop it in right now.
And this is what gets us funding to do things like hire a group of grant writers to support our communities, you know, during difficult times, right? Like it shows, like the numbers that you all provided, the data that you provided already, like people are floored right now. The funding community is like, oh my gosh, I had no idea there was this big of a need, right? So please continue to do that. We are in a place now as a community where we are not being reactive anymore right now, right? We're almost a year after the wildfires. We need to really be proactive and data-driven in the work that we're doing, and you all can guide that. So we really appreciate that and making sure that we are setting up systems that are ready and prepared. Unfortunately, I hate saying this, not if, but when we have, you know, the next, you know, issue that we have to face as a community together. We want to be better prepared, and we want to better prepare our neighbor islands through processes like this as well. So thank you all. Any other questions? All right, it looks like the link was already put in the chat by Lindsay. So again, please do fill out that survey. We really appreciate your time and your interest in supporting this process and bringing funds into our community. We cannot do it by ourselves, so we're grateful to have so many people that are interested in doing this. It's going to take a village, and I'm super grateful to be a part of it with you all. So have a great rest of your day.